If you're hearing this, I need you find a way to contact my local authorities for me before sunrise. You're probably asking, what the hell? And very much justified. Let me start by saying my name is not important, but for story purposes, I'll go by Richie. And I was supposed to be enjoying some fucking dank birria tacos right now at my girlfriend's. But now here I am holding a Cutco night as I write this from the closet in her parents' bedroom. Laura's parents' mansion sits alone and secluded on the outskirts of the Dallas Metroplex, nestled in one of those rich suburban landscapes where silence is as thick as the evening fog. We were supposed to be enjoying our last few days before heading back to college, smoking, drinking, hot tub activities that aren't important. If only I had listened. No, like really listened. Richie, are you even hearing me? Laura's voice cut through my distraction. I mumbled something. My attention split between her and the Uber Eats notification on my phone. This is your Uber Eats driver. ETA is 20 minutes. Bet, I replied half-heartedly. Thanks again. It was past 2 a.m. and Laura was drunk, White Claw in hand, mid-sentence about our communication issues from this past semester, how we never truly listened to each other. The irony here would be fucking hilarious in any other situation other than this one tonight. You don't know my rising sign or even my favorite vegetable, and it's not like I'm not telling you these things all the time. I will give her that. Babe is brash, as she is chatty. Then she looked me dead in the eyes and asked, "What's even the code to get into the front door?" I confidently told her I knew it, but here's the truth. I didn't. Was it 00203 or 0039 Otta? I wasn't sure, but I wasn't about to admit that. I'm a great listener, I told her, forcing a smile. My phone buzzed again. A text from the Uber driver. "Hello, this is Diego with Uber. Can I call you?" I only half saw the message. Laura was still talking and I was still not listening. We started to argue, the usual dance of a relationship stretched thin by distance and miscommunication. She even tossed out again if I knew her simple code to access her house, and again, I deflected. "Babe, you let me in every day since we started dating. Why would I need to know that?" Then another text came. This one finally caught my attention. "Answer, please. I'm scared." Something felt off. I told her she was right as I stepped into the kitchen to call Diego. His voice was timid, shaking. "Hi, this is Diego. I'm your driver. I have your tacos." "Oh, thanks, bro. This is all I can try to muster since I hate small talk." "You good?" "I hit a deer," he said. "What?" But when I got out to check, there was nothing there. He paused, then added something that made my skin crawl. Then I saw her, a woman, standing by the road. She had this long dress facing an open field. Her back was turned to me. I tried to calm him down, chalking it up to the creepy dusk driving in Dallas backwoods. "Hey, you know how Dallas County treats their homeless man, probably just a lady wandering out past the city? I'll give you a good tip, bud," I said. "Just get my Jack-in-the-Box to me." But Diego wasn't letting me go. "Sir, I've seen her twice now," he whispered. "I'm sorry?" "She was standing at a stop sign at 10 miles, and then I saw her again just now before calling you amigo. She was on a billboard railing, just standing there, always with her back turned." I could hear Laura in the background, asking what was taking so long. Diego was praying now, muttering in Spanish. His fear was infectious, crawling through the phone line and into my bones. "Look, I'm almost there," he said. "Can you meet me outside?" Walking over to my book bag, I grabbed my gun, just in case. "What the hell are you doing?" She caught me as I started to tuck my Smith into my back pocket. I put Diego on mute and caught her up to speed, which immediately caused her to laugh. "Vagrants are everywhere. He needs to chill out. And you," she added, grabbing for my gun. "Give me that now. You know how my parents feel about that." I didn't argue with her and handed it over. It's her house anyway. Yet something didn't feel right. "Certitacita, fuck, I forgot Diego." "Diego?" I said quickly, unmuting and putting him on speakerphone for us both to hear. "Hey, sorry, I was grabbing my shoes. Are you here?" Silence. Diego? Silence. Still. With him still on, I checked his GPS. He was here, right outside. Then he finally said something you never want to hear at 2 a.m. The woman, Diego forced out in almost a whisper. She's here, my friend. My heart was in my ass now. Diego, where is she? She's on the roof, back turned. Amigo, how? Laura rolled her eyes, cocking my gun. She grabbed her jacket and headed out, telling me to stay inside and be ready to call 911 just in case. I'll get the food and check on the driver, she said. If someone's on the roof, call the cops. Babe, I'll just go grab it. No, I got it, she stopped in a drunk stare. Besides, at least I know my code. And with a smirk that said checkmate, my girlfriend headed outside. Through the door camera, I watched her approach the car. Back on with Diego, I thanked and told him Laura was on her way. Her nonchalance made me realize how silly this seemed. A woman on the roof? And did he really hit a deer? Or just trying to get a fat tip with a bizarre story? That's when I got more silence from Diego. Hey Diego, you there? My girlfriend is walking up. Hello? I could hear Laura approaching on his phone. Is anyone... Her voice cut off. What the fuck? Did he attack my girlfriend? Was there really a woman outside? I ran for the door when I heard a laugh, not Laura's laugh. Someone else laughing, or trying to laugh, and sound human. I stopped in my tracks. Something in me told me to not open the door. Diego? Silence on the other end. Diego? More laughter. It sounded like neither male or female. Laura? My phone lost signal. The Wi-Fi flickered. Then the lights went out. Fuck. The only light left in Laura's mansion was the camera security panel at the front door. I ran to it, assuming it must have its own connection separate from the house. I tried the panic button in big red digital letters, but the panel was unresponsive. Yet the camera was just fine. What was happening? And there she was, on the camera, Laura. Back turned to me. In the driveway, Diego's car sat with hazards blinking. I could barely see, but his car doors were all swung open, completely empty. Laura, I called through the door mic. Stop playing around. She didn't respond. Babe? Silence. She didn't move a muscle. Babe? Communication? Remember that? Not a word as the bright hazard lights flashed on and off, on and off. Laura didn't move for what felt like an hour, and then, like a puppet on a strange marionette, she lifted her hand out. The way she twisted her arm made me force myself to assume it was just a camera glitch. I heard a weird crackle as she then stuck out one crooked finger and started pressing door codes. 00000, buzz, rejected. 00001, buzz, rejected. Babe? 0003, buzz, rejected. Babe? Do you need me to let you in? 004, buzz, rejected. She continued one code after the other. So here I am, in her parents' closet with her mom's steak knives. My gun was last with her. My phone will suddenly not connect. The security system is inoperational to send help, and yet the only thing keeping her from getting in. And I still hear her downstairs, pressing buttons. Buzz. Reject. You don't listen to me. Rings through my ears from every time she ever told me that since we started dating. And now I'm sitting here, accepting she was right. I could have just admitted I don't listen and how I could do better, and hell, even asked her what the house code was. But now look at me. 00203? Samson Sam Bagpal? I'm reeling as I try to remember. Laura knows the code to her own home. Whatever that is outside does not. And it's only a matter of time before it gets it right. It was 10 p.m. when I finally stepped into my apartment after a long day at work. Exhausted, all I wanted was a hot shower and some sleep. I had only moved into the building a week ago and hadn't yet gotten to know my neighbors. As I fumbled around for my keys in my bag, I noticed something strange. The light above the elevator at the end of the hallway was flickering in an irregular pattern. I brushed off the oddity and stepped into my apartment. I set my bag down on the table and double-checked the locks on the door. The place was quiet, save for a faint sound coming from the hallway. It sounded like the soft shuffle of footsteps. Probably just someone from the next floor, I muttered, trying to convince myself as an uneasy feeling crept up my spine. I reached for my phone to check messages, but the signal was unusually weak. Before I could make sense of it, the phone lit up with an incoming call from an unknown number. "Hello?" A low, raspy voice came through, barely audible but urgent. "Don't open the door, no matter what." My blood ran cold as I froze, staring at the door as though it would open on its own. The room felt colder, as if an unseen draft had swept through. Before I could respond, the call ended, leaving only silence and my heart pounding in my chest. I stood there, motionless, listening for any hint of movement. The footsteps in the hallway returned, this time louder, more deliberate. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice wavering. There was no answer. I took a cautious step toward the door and peered through the peephole. Empty. The hallway was deserted, but the flickering light now shone brighter, as though it were trying to tell me something. As I stepped back, my eyes caught something on the table. An unfamiliar photo. It was a picture of my living room, but in the image, I was standing in the exact spot I was now. The realization sent a chill through me. "That's impossible," I whispered, backing away. Suddenly, there was movement behind me. I turned around, my pulse racing, but found nothing. The kitchen light flickered, casting a quick shadow that danced across the glass window. A whisper, sharp and cold, slipped into the silence. "You're not alone." I froze, my skin prickling with fear. I wanted to deny it, tell myself it was exhaustion playing tricks on me, but every sound, every shadow felt real. I edged toward the kitchen, where the light was still sputtering. Each step felt heavier, like I was wading through water. When I reached the kitchen, everything was as it should be, except the window was open, the cool night air seeping inside. "I never opened this," I muttered, my voice barely audible over the rush of blood in my ears. Without warning, the light went out completely, leaving me in pitch darkness. My breathing quickened as I heard footsteps, but this time, they were close. Very close. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice a broken whisper. No response. Just the sound of heavy breathing, not my own, coming from behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Empty. Nothing but the suffocating silence and the cold that seemed to coil around me like a snake. Then, a voice came from inside the room, calm and low, but familiar. "Didn't I tell you not to open the door?" It was the same voice from the phone call, but it was no longer distant. It felt like it was right there behind me, inside my apartment. Panicked, I bolted to the living room, but the scene that met me made my blood freeze. The photo on the table had changed. Now it showed me sitting on the couch, but behind me, a shadow loomed, tall and indistinct, like a dark figure carved out of night. I shivered as the room seemed to get colder, the furniture trembling slightly. The knock at the door returned, this time faster, louder, like an urgent warning. I reached the door and hesitated, torn between running or opening it. The knocking grew louder, the sound of it splintering in my ears. Whatever was on the other side would break through if I didn't act. "Who are you? What do you want?" I screamed, my voice breaking. The reply was almost a hiss coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You already opened the door when you moved in." The door flew open, slamming against the wall with a force that shook the room. I stumbled back, eyes wide, but there was nothing outside, just the suffocating darkness. Before I could make sense of what was happening, I felt something cold wrap around my ankle. I looked down to see a pale gray hand, fingers as thin as twigs and as cold as ice, pulling me toward the open door. I screamed and fought, using every ounce of strength to pull away, but the shadow swallowed me whole, dragging me into the dark. Epilogue. I woke up on the floor of my apartment, the air eerily still. The clock on the wall said it was still 10 p.m., but everything felt wrong. I thought it must have been a nightmare until I saw the photo on the table. It was me, lying on the floor, eyes closed, and the shadow standing over me, eyes hollow and unblinking. It was one of those nights when the city never seemed to rest, the streets alive with the chatter of late-night bars and the occasional screech of tires. I had just finished my shift at the local cafe and was heading home when my phone buzzed with a new delivery request from Uber Eats. The app showed a distant address, deep in the old part of town, the kind of place that made you second-guess every shadow. But money was money, and the tips were always good for these late runs. I accepted the order and started my car. The GPS guided me down winding streets where the faint glow of streetlights flickered like dying embers. The buildings were old, peeling paint and cracked facades, their windows like hollow eyes staring into the darkness. I could feel the weight of the night pressing down on me, thick and suffocating. My heart began to quicken, and the city noise behind me grew muffled, replaced by an uneasy silence. The air outside carried the tang of rust and decay, and I shivered despite the warmth in my car. When I pulled up in front of the address, an old Victorian house loomed like a specter. The porch sagged under its weight, with splintered railings that looked ready to collapse. The curtains in the window swayed as if moved by an unseen hand, shrouded in a deep shadow that refused to let light pass. I squinted at the house, its silhouette jagged against the moonlit sky, and felt a tightness coil in my chest. This was a place where stories ended, not began. I swallowed hard, clutching the paper bag with the food, the warm aroma of Chinese takeout mixing with the damp chill in the air. The last thing I wanted was to go inside, but the promise of a hefty tip pushed me forward. The door creaked open before I could knock, revealing a figure standing in the doorway. He was tall, gaunt, and draped in a tattered robe that seemed to shift in the dim light as if alive. The fabric hung off his shoulders in jagged folds, revealing skin pale and translucent, veins like thin black threads. His eyes were sunken, deep pools of black that seemed to devour any semblance of warmth or life. A thin line of drool dripped from the corner of his cracked lips. "Come in," he rasped, his voice like the scraping of dry leaves against a window. It sent a cold shiver down my spine, one that had nothing to do with the chilly night air. I hesitated, glancing over my shoulder at the dark street. The hairs on my neck stood on end, but something deep inside me urged me forward. A tip this big was worth the risk, right? The air inside was colder than it should have been, carrying a stench that stung my eyes and made my throat tighten. The smell of decay, like rotting wood and damp earth, mixed with something metallic and sharp. My feet dragged against the worn rug that covered the cracked wooden floor, which moaned beneath my weight. The walls were lined with old portraits, their eyes seemingly following me as I passed. The figures in the pictures had hollow, haunted expressions, mouths twisted into silent cries. The man didn't move to take the food. Instead, he just watched me, his eyes fixed with a feverish intensity that made my skin crawl. I felt like an insect pinned under a magnifying glass, every movement scrutinized. His smile, if it could be called that, was a sickly, stretched thing that showed jagged, yellowed teeth. "Your order, sir?" I stammered, holding the bag out to him, my fingers trembling. The bag felt suddenly heavy, as if the food had grown in weight, pressing down on my arm. He tilted his head, and the motion was so unnatural that it took me a second to realize that it wasn't just his head that had moved. His whole neck cracked, a sickening series of pops that made my stomach turn. His eyes shimmered with something dark, almost animalistic, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw hunger in them. He reached out, but his hand was trembling, mottled skin stretched tight over sinewy bone. When he took the bag, I felt a shock run up my arm, as though an electric current had been triggered. His skin was ice cold, and the touch burned like frostbite. I let out a small, involuntary gasp as I pulled back, eyes wide and panicked. The front door slammed shut behind me, the sound like the boom of a cannon reverberating through the empty house. I spun around, heart pounding so hard it felt like my ribs were going to break. The dim light flickered and grew weaker, casting deep, shifting shadows that clawed at the edges of the room. From somewhere deep in the house, a voice whispered, broken and childlike, repeating one word over and over. "Hungry. Hungry." The air felt heavier, pressing against my chest as if it were trying to squeeze the life out of me. My gaze darted to the corners of the room, expecting to see something shift, something lurch forward. But nothing did. I took a step back, my foot catching on the edge of the rug, and I stumbled, my palms scraping against the splintered floor as I fell. I glanced up and saw that the man was no longer just watching me. He was moving, stepping forward, his limbs bending in unnatural, jerky movements that didn't seem to follow any human logic. He was a marionette with its strings cut, every step grotesque and wrong. The darkness behind him stirred, and shapes began to emerge, their outlines wavy and shifting. They moved like shadows, but had a presence, a weight, that made them more than just darkness. Their eyes were hollow, wide and unblinking, and their mouths stretched open, forming silent screams that reverberated in my skull. One of them reached out, a hand that was nothing more than bone and sinew, jagged fingers ending in claws that scraped against the floor. The noise was a chorus of whispers, an incoherent melody that made my vision swim. The voice from the depths of the house spoke again, louder this time, hungry. I reached for my phone, but it slipped from my hand, skittering across the floor out of reach. I pushed myself backward, my breath ragged as my chest heaved. The room seemed to close in, the walls stretching and shuddering as if in pain. The man's face was now inches from mine, the stench of rotting flesh overwhelming me. His mouth opened wider, the teeth glinting in the faint light, and I realized with a sickening jolt that the food in the bag was not meant for me. The figures pressed closer, their limbs bending and twisting in impossible ways. The room grew colder, and the air crackled with static, vibrating against my skin. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was the glint of the food container, still sealed and untouched. It whispered promises of satisfaction that would never come, as the air grew colder and the world spun into oblivion.